January 1945. The cold of Europe was so keen that it almost cut the bone. A procession of German women strolled slowly through the snow on a dark road in the woods. They were frail, hungry, and dressed in whatever clothes they could get. They were largely non-combat troops, clerks and nurses, and factory hands conscripted into the war and swept to the west as the German front fell. They were not well informed of their destination. It was no longer the officers giving orders, but fear, hunger, and hope of surviving another day. The women heard engines at the end of the forest. Their bodies tensed. They were afraid of withdrawing German troops, or even of SS patrols, which seek out deserters. The sound grew louder, and through the trees there appeared forms, trucks, heavy and olive drab, on which white stars had been painted on the sides. They were American. The women stopped in the road. Some gasped. Others were folding their hands involuntarily, as though they were about to be judged. They were told that becoming prisoners of Americans may lead to humiliation and even death. But another night in the snow with starving stomachs was even more terrifying. American soldiers were getting out of the trucks with lowered but ready rifles. Their breath was smoked away in the cold air. The vast majority of them were quite young, hardly older than some of the German women. One of them, which was Private Tanner, came nearer to the column, examining their features and uniforms. He had anticipated anger, perhaps fanatical patriotism to the government, but here, before his eyes, were sunken eyes, trembling hands, and cheeks that were drawn lean by starvation. Lise was standing in front of her, one hand on the shoulder of a shuddering girl of withered 18, called Clara. This was the first time she ever talked to an American. A moment the words got caught down her throat. Then they appeared, hard and splitting. "We have not eaten in 4 days." The sentence hung in the air. The ladies with her lowered their heads, ashamed to say how desperate they were. Hunger was now a sort of a disgrace. Tanner let out a slow breath. He had viewed prisoners before, but not such. These were women who did not appear menacing. They were as though people that the war had thrown away. Sergeant Harlan Duke, a square-jawed, hard man, fought since Normandy through savage campaigns, came up beside Tanner. He looked at the women with distrust and half pity. His voice did not change. He issued his order. They must round the women up kindly, without shouting and ill manner, and take them out of the road before they were frozen. The women did not resist. Others fell due to tripping, and they were picked up by American soldiers who held them by the arms. They were brought to a little clearing, upon which the Americans had camped. A pot of weak coffee was simmering over a little stove in the clearing. Its odor was floating in the cold air. The women of Germany paused in their instincts, with their eyes on the steam. Their bodies were aware of the warmth and food promise sooner than their minds. Tanner observed how their eyes were fixed on that ascending steam as though it became the sole thing in the world that was of interest. Duke grumbled that they had captured prisoners of war now, and the Geneva Convention was in force, and they should be fed and housed as other POWs, not mistreated and starved. For Lise, this was confusing. She had anticipated shouts, search, perhaps even bodily chastisement. Rather, she witnessed blankets and metal cups being distributed. She caught the quiet, daily American soldier talk. One of these, Tanner, poured out a cup of hot water and gave it to her. The mere heat of her fingers were nearly unreal. She had not been holding anything warm in days. The numbness of her hands as she became thawed was pain, yet she nonetheless held onto the cup as though it could be gone. The hunger of this population was not only about full stomachs. There were numerous bombings that had left many of the women homeless and dispersed or without families. Their destiny was over, and a long marching and coldness in their place. But sitting a few moments round the fire of the Americans, something diminutive changed. The fear loosened a little. The cold was a little less inhuman. Duke watched them carefully. He was too seasoned to believe in any pause of war. In a very short time, additional trucks came. One of the lieutenants told Duke a temporary holding camp a few miles down west could receive the new prisoners, though, of course, it had not been constructed to receive a woman. Orders were orders. The women were also carefully pushed into the trucks, some being pushed by soldiers when they were too weak to push themselves into the trucks. Lise stood still with the step, clinging to Clara by the hand. Tanner went forward and extended his arm to support her. It was a small thing, yet to Lise it was a kind of first small act of kindness, which she had been receiving after the war had ruined her former life. The camp was a crude place on a small ridge over a frozen river. It was no fort of stone, but a group of canvas tents and barbed wire and small guard posts. Slim pediments of smoke were coming out of chimneys and floating into the grey sky like strands of hope. The women were processed at a central tent as soon as the trucks came to a stop. It has lanterns inside that light everything yellow, and tables where soldiers requested names, ages, and occupations. Other women responded in worn-out, mechanical tones. There were also those that could hardly talk. An American private was recording her answers, which Clara gave in a whisper, and every now and then looked up, somewhat inquiring and pitying. Lise, as she came forward, drew herself to the best of her strength, without attempting to conceal the fact that she felt herself weak. Her name sounded funny when she uttered it, after all those days without speech and starvation. When the soldier questioned her about the length of time since her last good meal, she hesitated, but would not lie. 4 days, she said. His pencil slowed as he wrote. Tanner was standing close to the entrance, and he looked reflective. The women were processed and then carried to a long sleeping tent, which was lined with plain cots. They each had a folded blanket at their foot, and in one corner a little heater was smouldering a smattering warmth. The women slipped back to position. Clara dropped nearly at once, with closed eyes. Lise still sat, searching the tent, the guards, and the exit. Her psyche remained in survival mode, even in a safer location. Meanwhile, out of doors by the supply tent, Duke and some of the guards talked about the situation. The provisions of the camp were already rationed. Female POWs had not been anticipated by command. Duke was aware that he had to give the prisoners the rules and feed them, but any food that was added to the women would have to come at the expense of the Americans' own stocks. Tanner intervened, claiming that the women could hardly stand and they should be fed on real food and not leftovers. A deadly battle was decided in the camp. The battle between humanity and military necessity, between the humanity of the men on the ground and the requirements with which they had to make do. With warmer light at evening, the mess tent was lit up. The cookers had prepared a plain yet substantial stew of potatoes, beans, and meat scraps, with regular army rations inside. Dark bread was thick, and so was the coffee, which was brewing in big pots and the aroma was thick in the cold air. Tanner went out with crates of empty bowls to the correct line. He reconsidered the cracked voice of Lise and the manner in which her hands had trembled round that first cup of hot water. Gradually, his concept of the identity of the enemy started to change. The women took their places at the long tables and opened out to eat. They used to eat slowly, nearly very carefully, as though they were frightened that the food might be removed. After the first spoonful, Clara began to cry. "It is warm," she said, as she whispered, like that was the blessing. Around them, soft voices rose. Women were able to talk the first time in days. Tension was loosened off of their shoulders. The war was distant, out of a moment. On the outside, Duke strolled with the lieutenant who was visiting. The officer made threats that local civilians were not going to be pleased to hear that prisoners are being fed well when they themselves were hungry. About the camp, Duke responded that they would abide by the law and make it a residence of intentional brutality. New orders were issued in higher command later that night. They did not command punishment or more severe treatment. Rather, they required reports on physical conditions of every prisoner, particularly the women. The command was now getting periodic reports of starving civilians and support staff trailing behind the retiring German troops. The authoritarian orders were in dry, official terminology, but there was a significant line inside, a line that gave the go-ahead to add more calories in the event of medical necessity. The following day, medical workers stormed into the tent of women. They passed on cot to cot, touching pulse and heartbeat, eyes and hands. The women had not been touched, so much as roughly, in many months. The medic was listening to the chest of the younger girl, and Lise sat next to Clara. With the pale light, Clara looked very thin. The medicine man scowled and jotted that she must have something better than simple stew. There was no blame in his voice, just concern, and that in itself started to restore a possible sense of trust. This afternoon, every woman was getting a little more to eat. The stew portions were rather larger, and the pieces of bread were deeper, and the poorest of them, as Clara were fed a little with oatmeal and a little sugar. Yet still it was not luxury, but it was a step up, and when you are so accustomed to real hunger, every little step seems like a giant one. After some days, the women ate more frequently, and they started talking. Legends of bombarded cities, missing families, and never-ending shifts at the factories went round the tent. Lise read those stories and sewed them in pattern into her perceptions of the war. She did not talk much about herself. Her personal recollections were too urgent to unload. In his turn, Tanner was walking closer to the tent of women more frequently. He claimed he was visiting security and supplies, but he was aware that that was not the entire truth. He had seen Lise assisting others, then herself, and how she looked so attentively at the guards, not with evident fright at all, but with scrutinizing care. One day Lise found a little folded paper under her blanket, and it was heavy with a little stone. There was in simple block letters that, in case she or Clara were ill, they must inform a guard, as there were extra rations on hand to those in the worst condition. It had no name, but she was familiar with the handwriting of Tanner, the forms that he had completed previously. She had the note under her pillow, but was not completely aware of the reason why it had to be there, but she just felt that it was something valuable. With the air gradually calming down in the camp, the fundamental question remained, food was scarce. The American soldiers were not subject to the same rationing regulations as themselves, and within the law and in the fine nature of things, they were just as much feeding prisoners as they were feeding themselves. Then one day, the strain, without the wire, came vis-a-vis. A few of the village civilians came to the gate of the camp, wrapped in heavy coats, with tired and hard faces. They informed Duke that their children were starving and why prisoners were being given meals, yet there was local families in need. Duke attempted to justify that the army was obliged by the Geneva rules and that POWs had a right to rations. Anger that has its origin in hunger is obstinate. The villagers were not satisfied, and they took their resentment along with them. The visit was soon known about the camp. The fear had started back into the tent of the women. Lisa had too many experience of the desperate civilians to know what they could do when they felt aggrieved. On this particular evening, Duke entered the tent of the ladies. His face was heavy, with an atypical heavy look. He replied to them that there was a complaint and that command should look into the case. This may happen, he replied, and they would know more in the morning. Nearly no one slept well that night. The ladies were lying awake and hearing the wind blow at the canvas. The guards paced about with closed visages. With only one lantern, Duke was reading reports afar again and again, sitting in his command tent. It was early in the cold grey dawn, and Duke had his men around the mess tent. Frost glittered on the wires. He informed them that the headquarters had instructed a complete inspection of the camp. It meant that officers would arrive, inspect all that, and determine whether anything had to be altered. The first thing that came to Tanner was the rations. He was afraid that the women's food would be trimmed. Duke pledged to obey command, but simply stated that he would not see anyone starve under him. In the afternoon, the same morning, a jeep and a staff car went through the gate. A tall officer came out of the vehicles when they came to a halt. This was Colonel Abram Hayes, who was a strict man and a sharp man when it comes to decisions among the troops. Hayes hurried over to the guard posts, opened ration crates, questioned the cooks, and read the medical notes. He missed very little. At last he paused in front of the tent of women. He hesitated, and then lifted the flap aside and got in. The tent fell silent. The women sat up straighter. Lisa also stood up, and stood a little in front of Clara, in silent defense. The colonel gazed around the tent slowly. He accepted the skimmed bodies, the weary countenances, the manner in which blankets were held in a tight grip. It was not the air of sluggish ease, but of weakness. He halted in front of Lisa and inquired how long had she been without decent food before being taken captive. Lisa looked boldly up in response to this. 4 days. Her voice was not playful in any way, just fact. Hayes watched her a while and glanced at Clara. He requested the girl to make a step. Clara did, and her knees gave way, and she fell down into the arms of Lisa. The hard composure of the colonel broke a little. He called for a medic at once. Tanner, who watched on the entrance, ran out and brought back a medic who knelt by Clara and examined her and said she was terribly malnourished. She probably would have not gone this far without the recent meals. Colonel Hayes turned to Duke. There was a tightening of his jaw, though he was repeating exactly what he had already said. The rations of the women would be doubled. Duke slowed up and thought he heard what was going on. Hayes reiterated the command, attached to the fact that the change must go up the chain. Should civilians complain once again, he would be the one to take care of the repercussions. The relationship in the tent eased immediately. Other women started to cry in low tones, not in fear this time, but in relief and bewilderment. Lise hanged back upon her cot with Clara clutched to her. She said thank you, but she did not know whom she was thanking, the medic, the colonel, or something superior to all of them. Before noon, more substantial food was brought up at the mess tent. The stew was darker, the slices of bread larger, and, to the most delicate ladies, small portions of tinned fruit, something which they had not dreamed of eating in a prison camp. Lise and Clara ate a bowl together, Lise taking each spoonful with mellow care to the mouth of Clara. Tanner stood looking on with his lean against a supportive pole. Later in the day, the tone in the camp changed. There was a barbed wire and guarding still, but it was no longer like a cold waiting room between fear and punishment. It was, at least so far, a kind of rude hut cut out of disorder. Colonel Hayes himself appeared to be different. He now looked at the logistics and reports with austerity, but there was something more in his demeanor, which was a willed conviction that this camp would never become a place where hunger could decide who was worthy of decency. His next action was to invite a few people together near the mess tent. Duke, Tanner, the medic, and a couple of women, among them Lise, were loosely half a circle. Hayes talked in a very steady manner. He said that the war had already taken much more than enough of everybody. This camp would not contribute to the cruelty by starving them or considering them as less human beings. There was a mute power in his words. No one argued. No one had to. There was a feeling of a lull in the wire, a moment. Stomachs were fuller. Fear had eased. The slip of paper with a note underneath the pillow of Lise, the 2 slices of bread on her tray, were now greater in size. Evidence that compassion need not be destroyed, even in a prison-built place. But the war had not ended yet. As Lise turned back to the tent, the distant roar of some heavy trucks went across the valley. Duke ran by, looking along the shoreline. Automatically, Tanner drew straight, hand near his rifle. Lise held her breath and heard the sound approaching. Even the meal, which had changed everything, remained warm in them, and another test was in progress. Whatever it was which those trucks bore, new demands, new captives, new strains of the foreign world, would determine whether the wavering charity which now had staked its tent in this camp could live the next chapter of this war. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to more amazing history stories.